Hi guys, welcome back to Reserved Investments on YouTube. Today's video, we're going to talk about 5 more collecting categories that are either losing steam and or quote-unquote dying as we enter the year 2020 and beyond. I'm not going to put too much commentary at the beginning of this video because I want to get right into these topics. But what I will say is, when I make these videos, I try to use a combination of items that skirt the antique marketplace as well as the collectibles marketplace. That way, you guys who watch this video, you're not going to be bored to death listening to me talk about glassware or certain objects that you may have no interest in. I will state this though. If you listen to me talk about these items, every subject that I talk about, excuse me, whether you collect it or not, it has a lesson hidden in it. That's what I want you to be listening for. For instance, the first topic on this list is going to be boring to most of you. It's depression glass. However, here's what you got to understand. In the 1940s, in the 1950s, in the 1960s, in the 1970s, and the 1980s, collectors speculated heavily on depression glass. The bubble burst right around when eBay first premiered because collectors, with the advent of e-commerce and the internet, were able to see just how much of these products were out there. And as a result of the glut of supply that was sitting with dealers, collectors, and even enthusiasts, the market almost collapsed as a result of that. So let's talk about depression glass really quick. Depression glass is a clear or colored, translucent, machine-made glassware that was distributed free or low cost around the time of the Great Depression in the United States. It's very important to understand that because when we talk about mass production, a lot of people don't realize that America was mass producing items since the 1830s. Mass production is nothing new. Speculating on mass-produced products, when I get to a video that I have in the planning stages about pop culture-based items and speculation, some of you guys, your mouth is going to hit the floor when you learn that back in as early as the 1850s, people were speculating on items because of their quote-unquote collectible value. I would love to tell you how few of the items that people were speculating on back in the 1850s actually are worth money today. Just because something's old and has age to it does not mean it has value. Always remember that. Markets can and do change. So going back to this, depression glass was made in the millions. There's very few examples of quote-unquote rare depression glass. And here's the thing, guys. The depression happened, the stock market crashed in 1929. That's what set off the depression. It was a lack of regulation in the greater financial markets. For those of you that are against regulation, that's something to think about. So I'm going to say, I'm not going to get political, but for those of you that think a free, unfeathered economy works, I have one word for you. Really, it's a year, 1929. That said, when the market tanked, a lot of manufacturers scrambled to find new ways to create income, and low-cost items became the norm. Well, depression glass was a low-cost item that was very cheap to make, and it was also durable because it's pretty much machine-made glassware that was manufactured in the United States. So that allowed a lot of the companies that made these type of products to be able to survive for the long term and really ride out the depression. One of the companies that you may have heard of that profited substantially during this time was the Quaker Oats Company. You know what the Quaker Oats Company did to survive, guys? Here's a little bit of history for you. The Quaker Oats Company offered pieces of depression glass with the purchase of some of their products. So if you bought a certain amount of Quaker Oats or whatever products they were producing at the time, you were able to take home a piece of glassware. Quaker Oats even had certain products where they would bundle glassware with the actual oats that they sold. So as a result, a lot of this stuff was produced and pretty much given away during the 1920s. Well, an interesting trend emerged. by the time the Depression was over and we were already knee-deep in World War II, after the World War ended, meaning World War II, a lot of the people, now that the economy was booming again, wanted to collect something, and one of the things that they collected was, you guessed it, depression glass. The problem is, back in the 1940s, 50s, 60s, before the internet existed, nobody knew just how many pieces of this stuff were manufactured or produced. Today, thanks to the rise of the internet, thanks to the rise of message boards that cater to antiques and collectibles, we know there's a lot of this stuff out there. So what happened was, literally in the late 1990s to the early 2000s, the market started going like this. Today, the market is at a very low level, meaning you can sell depression glass, but it has to be, the price has to be right for it to sell. That's not good for this type of market going into the future. So I do not encourage anybody to collect depression glass for the long term. It's a very poor speculative bet. It's a very poor investment. Stay away from it. Don't even try to go after any of the quote-unquote rare pieces, because honestly, it's more of a history lesson at this point than it is any type of commodity in the greater antiques and collectibles trade. I know there's going to be people that disagree with that assessment. You're welcome to argue with me all day long. All the numbers, the facts, the fundamentals don't lie, guys. Depression glass is pretty much, I don't want to say dead, because there's still a couple of kooks that go after it, but it is definitely in the doldrums. It's dying. So, let's go to the next category on this list, and we're going to take a hard right turn to the collectibles marketplace. Now, some of you are going to disagree with this category. Others of you that see this video, your heads are going to explode. Hot Wheels cars, Matchbox cars. Yes, vintage die-cast cars and modern era cars are dying. They are not going up year after year in the greater collectibles marketplace. There are some exceptions. There are a couple of vintage red wheel Hot Wheels cars that do sell for $60, $70, $80, $90, $100,000 a piece. Those items are extremely hard to find and uncommon on the market, and when they do come on the market, a lot of hardcore collectors go after them. That said, if you look at the market for even near mint red line Hot Wheels cars, or the Sweet 16 as they call them, the original 16 Hot Wheels cars that were produced in the 1960s to the 70s, those items are losing value across the board. Every now and then, there'll be an auction where somebody kept one in immaculate mint condition on the card. The item is perfect. There's no yellowing to the card's manufacturing or bubble, and it'll sell for a significant sum. Those auctions are few and far between. If you own any of these items, seriously just have your pulse on the market for the years to come. Yes, people and children are still playing with Matchbox cars. It's no different today than it was 10, 20, 30 years ago. The problem is, guys, as those children grow older, they're not reaching back into the vintage market from before where they were born and collecting the vintage cars. The market is taking a downturn, and with it, it's pretty much casting a shadow of doubt on the whole cast iron, die-cast collectibles marketplace as well. That market has been in trouble for several decades now, in all honesty. I have done another video about that where I talk about cast iron mechanical banks. Well, this is almost skirting that realm because it's a die-cast product. It is somewhat in that same marketplace. It's just known as a cheap vintage toy. A Hot Wheels car, obviously, sold when it was new for less than $1. However, the market has changed. Be careful if you're collecting this stuff for financial investment. You buy it because you like it. You go to Walmart, Target, what have you. You want to buy a lot of the new modern cars and keep them factory sealed because you like to collect that stuff. Don't let me stop you. But if you are doing it from a financial standpoint, please reconsider. The vintage Hot Wheel cars you have are not going to be worth as much as they are today in the future. If you want proof, look at the Pez collecting marketplace and how much that changed. In fact, that was one of the categories I did list in the previous video I did on 5 collecting categories that are dying off as we enter the year 2020 and beyond. Okay? Enough said about that. The next category is going to surprise a lot of you, and I really have to put a caveat on this because you got to let me explain where I'm going with this. The category is stamp collecting. Now, for those of you that watch this channel religiously, you know that when I invest in the greater antiques and collectibles trade, for one, I do it for long-term diversification, and the categories I go after are, some of you guys are going to be repeating this with me as I state these categories: coins and currency, historical documents, artwork, collectible first edition books. Now, stamp collecting, some of you are going to say, aha, well that's proof, Sean, that historic items do go down in value. You have to let me explain here. Yes, certain historical documents, coins and currency, if you buy that stuff wrong, I'm going to tell you, it's going to drop in value. Somebody who bought coins during the coin frenzy when third-party grading hit the market in the 1980s and paid a premium for their collector coins that were hitting the market overgraded and oversold by companies that were funded by Wall Street, if they go to sell those holdings today, they're going to lose money. That was back in the 80s when there was a speculative market building up in collectible coins and even currency to a lesser extent. However, this is the difference, guys. When we look back and we look forward to the history of the greater financial marketplace and or the Federal Reserve, a lot of people that study that history collect items like coins and currency. Stamps, unfortunately, as we enter the year 2020 and beyond, are a dying trend. How many of you guys, seriously, I mean, I do this still, but I'm old-fashioned, but how many of you guys literally go to the post office and buy a book of stamps and pay your bills by using stamps and postage? Most people in 2019, in 2020 and beyond, use either an app or a computer to pay their bills electronically. Most people, in few exceptions, are not putting a stamp on an envelope. The market has changed when you analyze the collectability of stamps. The only aspect of the stamp collecting marketplace that is surviving and or prospering is the top 3 to 5% of the market. And unfortunately, that is not going to be able to carry the market as a whole. Because if you look at the mid and lower tiers of the stamp collecting market, they're actually going on a downward drift. Now, we got to get interesting here. There is one caveat on this particular collecting category that I got to talk about. One thing when it comes to stamp collecting, the Certified Collectors Group out of Sarasota, Florida, who owns CGC, those of you that collect comic books, you know the name CGC. If you collect coins, NGC is also affiliated with them. And if you collect currency, PMG, Paper Money Guarantee, is also affiliated with that group. They announced plans, and I think they are actively grading collectible stamps. If third-party grading comes to the stamp marketplace, it very well has the potential to act like a catalyst and breathe new life into the market. But here's the thing. You have to have the investors follow. It can't just be collectors that go, yay, third-party grading for stamps. This is excellent. If the high-money investors don't care, the market won't turn around. If the high-money investors start to care and notice the market, it's going to go through the roof again. So that is a caveat with stamp collecting on this list. So let's go to collecting category number 4. Again, we're going back more to, we're going to skirt the antiques market with this one. Hummels, Hummel figurines that began to appear in 1930s Germany, and when World War II broke out, a lot of soldiers that were sent overseas would actually come in contact with these Hummel figurines, and they started to take them back to the United States. Well, when they did that, when the war was over, because the economy was booming again after the Great Depression, remember the Great Depression happened in 1929, World War II helped pull us out of it. Well, what happened was a lot of people were really enamored with these particular porcelain figurines. so people wanted to collect them. Well, the Hummel company, as a result of this, grew substantially. Now, here's the bad news. In 2017, the company declared bankruptcy. So, Hummel figurines were an interesting trend in the greater collectibles marketplace. And for those of you that follow my videos, this is another item that was speculated upon heavily, guys. In the 1950s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. 70s and 80s in particular was the pinnacle collecting peak of Hummel figurines in the U.S. market. If you were to have a Hummel figurine and it was of an uncommon type or something that had a little bit of value, it was as good as gold in your collection. It's no different than today if we talk about reserve list high-grade Magic cards or certain vintage video games, certain Pokemon cards, items of that nature. That was what a Hummel figurine was in the 1970s and 80s. And that's why I caution you guys that markets change. Nobody in 1970, 1980, or even 1990, if you would have told them that by September 2017, the Hummel company is going to be going bankrupt and declare bankruptcy, no one would have believed you. But the market changed that quick. If you want to know why, two catalysts. First, the generation that collected and coveted these items started to age. Somebody who collects Hummels today, if they were alive in the 1940s, let's be honest, they're just about hanging on in 2019. Another factor that brought this collecting marketplace to its demise was the advent of the internet and e-commerce. Guys, there's a lot of collecting categories that once eBay and e-commerce premiered on the scene, and we were able to get a view over how many items are truly on the market, the categories themselves scared off a lot of collectors due to the amount of supply that was out there and available to purchase, that collectors saw dealers that had 500 or 1,000 Hummel figurines, and they would go through website or e-commerce site or even looking at eBay, and they saw this mass supply that was coming into the market. They gave up collecting it, and they said this is not a wise investment. That's why eBay and the advent of e-commerce not only gave rise to collectibles as investments, but it also cratered a lot of collecting categories just due to the sheer ability to see the market for what it is. That's what hurt Pez dispensers. Pez dispensers, when eBay first came out, they were really hot. You would get a fortune for some what are known today as common Pez dispensers. I was there. I was profiting from it. Well, once e-commerce took hold and you could start logging into websites or interacting with other collectors, you would contact somebody in California who goes, hey, I collect Pez as well. You know, that item that you're considering rare, I got 20 of them sitting over here. See? And they would literally take a picture, upload it on the net, and you would go, oh my gosh, this item isn't as rare as I thought. And the market would start to implode. That's what a lot of you guys got to be careful about when you go after this mass-produced, modern, scarce items that really aren't scarce. It's just Nintendo limiting production. There's going to come a day where, I really say this, in 5 or 10 years, or even 15 years from now, amiibo collectors are going to be talking, and somebody's going to say, hey, you're looking for this Link amiibo for Link's Awakening. Well, I got 8 cases sitting here in a storage unit of this particular item. Those items aren't rare. Nintendo just released them in waves, or they manufactured scarcity to get people to pay a premium for the product. Okay? So, when we talk about Hummel figurines, please, they're dead. They're pretty much going the way of the dinosaur at this point. I don't see any recovery in this market possible. Now, let's get to the last collecting category, and we're going back to the collectibles trade. This is going to probably surprise some of you as well. Vintage board games. Now, I have to put a caveat on this particular subject matter. I'm not talking about some of the more modern, mass-produced board games based on H.P. Lovecraft or items of that caliber that have a cult following as well as a collectible following. What I am talking about is the vintage board games that came out in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. Stuff like where if you were to have the Munsters family board game or a board game based on the Addams family, items of that caliber. The more kish, pop culture-based board games that we all had as a kid, like Pac-Man the board game or Donkey Kong the board game, a lot of those items are losing value as we enter 2020 and beyond. There are some exceptions. For instance, if you have a very early Monopoly board game, you have a true collectible there because that's an iconic board game that we can all relate to. Same thing with Clue. Some of the very first early editions of Clue sell for a lot of money. Now, most people don't have those particular board games. They have later versions. This is why if you want to see something fun, go to a flea market or antique mart and you can literally buy like a board game like Clue or Monopoly or Payday or any of those popular games that came out in the 70s and 80s. You can see them at flea markets for $1 or $2. They have no value to very little value. Well, that trend is starting to snowball, where unless if you have something that is in the top tier of the market, you're really not going to get much for it on the secondary market. Now, there are some exceptions. Those of you like me that grew up in the 70s, 80s, 90s, you will remember games like Fireball Island. You will remember games like Dark Tower. Those particular iconic games are hot today because the generation like me, Generation X, who grew up with them, really coveted those games. That said, I would not be buying items like that with an outlook for long-term financial gains on them. The younger generations are not going to covet games like Fireball Island and Dark Tower. Those items are considered one-generation collectibles. So if you own them and you covet them, rather than passing them along to either your nieces, nephews, sons, or daughters, you're probably better off selling those particular items sometime in your life to maximize the financial return. I hope that has helped clarify my perception of what's happening in the vintage board game realm. Again, I do want to pull modern board games out from that particular subset of the market because a lot of the games that are coming out today, like what is the one that I used to play with my girlfriend? Betrayal on Haunted Hill House or something like that, set in the H.P. Lovecraft universe. Those games are going strong on the modern market. They're really not collectible yet because they're still able to be bought in stores, but I don't want to put that market in with the vintage market. The market I'm really referring to is items of pop culture fan base, like Addams Family, Munsters, Gunsmoke, Bonanza, that had a board game that came out related to them. Those items are starting to die out on the secondary market. Okay? Just food for thought. So guys, as always, I hope this video was beneficial to you. If it was not, please let me know in the comment section so I know going forward not to do any more videos on this particular topic. If there are videos that you do want me to do and comment on, please let me know in the comment section. And it's quite possible your idea will become a future video topic. Thanks, guys.